other education. When I first found out about it in 2013, I was intrigued, for I had never heard of disability theology. I'd always loved theology, and disability theology sounded interesting to me. Disability is a bad word in many people's vocabulary, so I was excited about attending a conference where it was looked upon as positive. Realizing there weren't any books written by people with a brain injury about brain injury and theology, I secretly wanted to write one. Not enough people know about brain injury, and I wanted to do my part in educating folks. So many people with traumatic brain injuries can't even consider writing a book, so I felt I should use my gifts. I didn't tell anyone though, because that conference consisted of hardcore theologians, and I felt a little bit vulnerable sharing my dream. I finally decided to let myself be vulnerable and got up my courage to say something about it. I added I didn't know if I could write it myself. I mentioned it a couple of times, and different folks at the Institute suggested I find someone to help me write it. I immediately thought of Joyce and decided to ask her when I returned home. To my surprise, she agreed. Well, it didn't happen that cleanly. I agonized about asking her because she had written so many other books. I tend to worry about things a lot, so of course I worried about asking her. I worried that she would think I was being too forward. I worried that she would say no. I worried that she wouldn't want to do it. Finally, I worked up the courage to ask, and she said yes. So we began. It was difficult dredging up all the memories of the accident and rehabilitation. It was 20 years later, and I put all that aside. Reliving it again was excruciating, but I felt it was important. It was important to remember, but it was powerful for me to see how God was active in it. There were times when I got really depressed. I'm not sure what happens in my brain, but I often get depressed, more depressed now than I did before my brain injury. Fortunately, Joyce could handle it. One of the side effects of brain injury is cognitive overload. I can't handle thinking too hard for very long. As a result, I could only work on the book for about an hour and a half a day, although I usually tried to work on it longer because I didn't want to accept the fact that I get overloaded too much. I know I wasted a lot of time because my brain was too overloaded to think. I was paying Joyce for her help as a writing coach, and I was wondering if it was worth it. I wasn't sure the book was going anywhere. At this point, Joyce suggested I apply for what is called a pastoral studies grant from the Louisville Institute to pay her to help me write the book. With Joyce's help, I won a grant, so I decided to continue working on it. Joyce will now introduce herself and say a few words about working on the book.
Well, I want to add my gratitude to Tamara's for the invitation to be part of this series. Over my lifetime, I've been very thankful to serve as a pastor, an editor of Sojourners magazine, a court advocate for survivors of domestic violence, and a chaplain to children with cancer. As Tamara and Jim both mentioned, I've written a few books, including a memoir, and most recently a historical novel inspired by the extraordinary life of the medieval mystics known as Beguines. In recent years, I particularly enjoyed encouraging a few friends who have lived compelling lives to write their memoirs, assisting them in the process. These have included a few peace activists, a pastor working on racial justice, a friend dying of cancer, and Tamara. I felt really honored when she asked for my assistance with her book. And I'm sorry, Tamara, that you agonized so much about asking me. My style when coaching authors has always been to lay out options and provide gentle guidance for their writing journey. Early on in our process, when Tamara and I were working together, on more than one occasion, she offered some version of, just tell me what to do. When I finally grasped how overwhelming sorting through possibilities felt to her, I dug deep to find my inner tyrant and began more intentionally shaping the book and assigning her pieces to write. That lesson was the first of many that I learned about the day-to-day challenges of brain injury. Before working with Tamara, I probably would have said that I was blind to this reality and had my eyes opened through the process of working with her. But among the most important lessons for me was coming to understand how we tend to use language that is offensive to persons with disabilities. Too often employing terms like blindness, deafness, or paralysis when referring to moral failures such as ignorance, apathy, and hard-heartedness. Tamara taught me how to take seriously her disability and the limitations it imposes, and at the same time to see her as far more than her brain injury. She has been a patient teacher, opening up intimate glimpses of her world to me with warmth, humor, and grace. Working with Tamara over a span of 3 years enabled me to see her at her best and her worst, as she saw me in those extremes as well. I am simply amazed at her persistence, courage, and strength of character as she continued to unravel her often painful story in the face of bouts of depression and daily struggles with energy and focus. I'm inspired by both the vulnerability and the power she reveals on the pages of her book. And I rejoice and I give thanks that our friendship, which we began more than 2 decades ago in Atlanta, deepened through the challenges and delights of working together to create Forgetting the Former Things. Back to you, Tam.
Thank you. Bill Gavinta, a disability scholar, wrote the foreword to the book. In the first paragraph, he writes about sociologist Arthur Frank in The Wounded Storyteller and how he outlines 3 cultural narratives that shape most of our responses to tragedy, such as an accident or illness. The first is chaos, where everything is thrown out of the norm. The second is recovery and healing. It's when surgery or something else brings the sufferer back to being normal again. He said there is a third way that he called journey. This is a search for a new normal and continues throughout life. He describes my book as being a journey. I view my life and book as a journey of healing. I do want to share a little bit of my history, even though it's in the book. I played in various types of groups, orchestras, quartets, trios, solos for various functions in the Kansas City area. My most interesting venture by far was as half of an accordion and violin duo called Bellows and Bows. We played for a variety of parties and receptions. Our steady gig was offering classical pieces, waltzes, polkas, and show tunes 5 days a week during breakfast and lunch at the Hyatt Regency Hotel's coffee shop. On Sundays, we strolled through the main restaurant, serenading patrons while they ate their waffles and eggs from the brunch buffet. I also had a large violin viola studio where I gave private lessons to children and youth. Although it was fun, as time went on, I knew it wasn't what I wanted to do forever. After some encouragement from one of the pastors at my church, I decided to switch careers. I began seminary at an American Baptist seminary in Kansas City, since I wasn't sure if being a minister was what I was called to do. When I was sure, I moved to Atlanta and went to Columbia Theological Seminary, where I graduated. After serving as an associate pastor for a few years in Atlanta, I felt called to work at a church more urban in nature, where I could preach and do more pastoral care. I was volunteering in urban ministries in downtown Atlanta, and I loved it. I had a couple of interviews that went pretty well, and I was excited about my future. I knew that was what I wanted to do. On August 26, 1996, my husband Michael and I decided to get some frozen yogurt. We lived off a busy street called Roswell Road, and the yogurt place was on that road. After eating our frozen yogurt, we headed home when I remembered a prescription I needed to pick up at a drugstore on the other side of the road. Michael was driving a stick shift car that we had recently purchased. He shifted to the incorrect gear when he was turning left, and a big Cadillac crashed into us. Since I was on the passenger side, I got the brunt of the crash, although we both sustained brain injuries. Michael was taken to a hospital, and I was taken to a trauma center where I was put into an induced coma. When I was stable, I was moved to a brain injury rehabilitation unit. Michael wasn't sure if I remembered him or not, since we'd only been married for 3 months, and often it is the newer memories that are lost, not the older ones. Finally, 3 weeks after the accident, I called him by name. First, in speech therapy, I had to relearn the parts of the body, what clothes to put on first. Apparently, it's pretty common for people to put their underwear on over their pants because they don't know which comes first. I also relearned names for common objects and how to walk, use my hands, and think again. I was building new pathways for neurons to travel in my brain so I could function. I do remember weeks later repeating words over and over and over again. I knew I was a minister, and I realized that I needed to be able to speak clearly. After 6 weeks of inpatient therapy, I continued with outpatient therapy. Following that, it was time to do vocational therapy at an outside place. I chose the Open Door community where I had volunteered before the accident and where I met Michael. The community served people on Georgia's death row and those coming out of prison, as well as people who lived on Atlanta Street. Here is an excerpt from that time. I had to give myself lots of time to get anywhere. If I missed a bus, I had a 30-minute wait for the next one. I gained a deep appreciation for all the folks who rely solely on public transportation to get where they need to go, especially in bad weather. I had a few appointments that required taking a MARTA subway train in addition to a city bus. I spent a lot of energy worrying about missing my connection from the train to the bus, and I found it hard to cope with the constant loud talk at the bus stop. This is when I became really aware of just how much cognitive energy I had lost. I lacked a full set of neurons in my brain to help me manage details and noise, and these trips utterly exhausted me. Fortunately, it was easier to get to the Open Door. I walked a few blocks to the bus stop and then rode one bus all the way down Briarcliff Road, which left me off a short distance from the community. Early on, my vocational therapist from the Shepherd Center came with me a couple of times to help me figure out how I could perform my responsibilities there. One of the main ones I was assigned was phone and door. As you might guess, this job entailed answering the phone and the door. The phone rang frequently with inquiries about volunteering, dropping off donations, and getting information about our services. People from the street showed up at the door constantly, seeking an aspirin or a pencil, a cough drop or a meal, picking up their mail or getting on the list for a shower or the weekly book clinic. My job included ushering them back to the clothing room and assisting them as they picked out a shirt or pair of socks, then rushing back to catch the phone. I learned quickly that phone and door was simply more than my brain could handle. Someone else was assigned to take over the phone while I continued to answer the door. This was better, but responding when the doorbell rang while I was helping a guest inside the house was still challenging. I was also doing other tasks, serving food for the soup kitchen, vacuuming the rugs, cleaning the bathrooms. I found it incredibly difficult to be someone with 2 master's degrees who couldn't always remember where to find the cleaning supplies and which toilet needed to be cleaned. After my accident, I experienced severe migraine headaches and tried many preventatives, but those that helped made my fatigue even worse. So every day at 12:30, I had to stumble off to a dark, quiet room for a nap just to make it through the afternoon. For a while, I used the loft room on the 2nd floor, gripping the railing as I went up the steps, always feeling like I was going to faint. After a while, overnight guests began staying in that room, and I had to find another one. A challenge because I can't think or see straight when I'm really tired. I had to grope my way down each day down the stairs to the dark, musty, and often cold basement to find an empty room and bed in which to crash. Often when I got there, I crawled under the covers and pulled them up over my head, feeling like a complete failure. Sometime during those days at the open door, I had a thought that seemed more profound to me than anything I had learned in seminary. In one life-shattering moment, I had gone from feeling like someone in control with a clear career path, the privilege of choice, and a measure of power, to being an invisible person on the sidelines, merely trying to cope with each challenge as it came and get through each hour as it unfolded. I wasn't simply feeling called to ministry among the marginalized. I was the marginalized. At this point, I want to talk a little bit about brain injury, so you'll have some background. Traumatic brain injury is one of the most common causes of disability and death in adults. According to Brainline, which is one of the most respected web resources for brain injury, an estimated 2.8 million people sustain a TBI annually. Of them, 50,000 die, 282,000 are hospitalized, and 2.5 million are treated and released from an emergency department. Many of those 2.5 million people have issues from their accident, but they show up later after they've left the hospital. Traumatic brain injury is a kind of brain injury. It's caused by a rapid forward or backward movement and shaking of the brain inside the bony skull that results in bruising and tearing of brain tissue and blood vessels. This causes some of the neurons or brain cells to die, and they can't be replaced. Closed traumatic brain injuries are usually caused by car accidents, falls, blasts from the wars, and increasingly in sports. It's interesting that the war and concussions from sports injuries have given brain injuries a lot more attention. Shaking a baby, called shaken baby syndrome, can also result in this type of injury. Penetrating or open head injuries happen when there is a break in the skull, such as when a bullet pierces the brain, like former US Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. It isn't being made public which lobes of her brain were injured. Well, the bullet went in the back of her head and came out the left side in the part that controls speech. Stroke, encephalitis, tumor, and other things are brain injuries. They're just not called traumatic brain injuries. There's no way to know their numbers. The side effects of those brain injuries are almost identical to the side effects of traumatic brain injury. The brain is responsible for hundreds of things, such as judgment, behavior, control, attention, concentration, control of emotions, speaking, memory, and many others. Since every injury is different, folks struggle with different things, usually several. I know a man who was kicked out of a brain injury center because he couldn't control his emotions. Gabby Gifford struggles with speech and walking after being shot have been very public. I have difficulty with overstimulation. It's hard for me to be in a room when there's a lot of people talking at once because I can't concentrate on the person I'm talking to. This is called selective attention. I use earplugs a lot, sometimes to block out noise, which is when I use pink earplugs. I have these special earplugs that I found on an autism site. I should have brought them out. They're in my purse. I keep them always. They don't block out all the noise, but they're less conspicuous than my bright pink ones. They help block out the background sounds, and I wear them often when I'm in a restaurant because there's always music and lots of people talking. Have you noticed that restaurants are so noisy? I think even people without a brain injury have difficulty with it. I also wear them when I volunteer at Saturday Sanctuary, a winter program at First Presbyterian Church for people who don't have homes, which offers lunch, movies, and games because there's so much noise. I don't particularly like wearing my bright pink earplugs in situations like that. In addition to cognitive overload, it's impossible for me to multitask because I can't go from one task to another without becoming overwhelmed and confused. My brain also becomes tired if I do a lot of things in a row. For instance, the day before Thanksgiving, I had to pick up a coat from his tailor, then go to a drive-through bakery on Smoky Park Highway. Have you ever been to that? It's a drive-through bakery that's new. It's right on Smoky Park Highway. I forget the name of it. Michael, what is it called?
Oh, Whiz.
Whiz. Yeah, try, it's great. I had to go there to pick up cinnamon rolls for Thanksgiving and a pie. Since my brain injury has affected my sense of direction, I really have no sense of direction now. I had trouble finding the bakery, and when I did, they were out of cinnamon rolls. I think I got my papers mixed up. Here we go. In terms of the cinnamon rolls, they told me that they would have them again in 15 minutes. And since they don't have much of a parking lot, I had tried to find somewhere else to park. The area is so busy, it was hard to find a place to just be for 15 minutes. At the time I returned, they only had 3 cinnamon rolls left. The truck overtaxed my brain. That afternoon, I worked out at the Y. Then I spent Thanksgiving Day at a friend's house, which was a lot of stimulation for me. The day after Thanksgiving, I was exhausted, which happens when I overdo it. One of my challenges is monitoring cognitive energy and stimulation. I often think, is it too much for me to go to that meeting? Will I be overloaded if I go to that rehearsal? If I make that phone call, will I have enough cognitive energy for my meeting? After my difficult time at the Open Door community, I still wanted to be a pastor again. So I found a volunteer activity that would allow me to be one. I volunteered with the chaplains department at Wesley Woods, a local retirement center, which had step-down units. This next excerpt is from that time. The first time I helped to lead a devotional service on one of the Alzheimer's units at the tower at Westlake Woods, I looked out at the sea of people and felt overwhelmed. About 40 residents sat in their wheelchairs lined up in rows, and a few more were in folding chairs up front. Their individual rooms lined the hallway on both sides of the large room where I stood, where meals were also served and other group activities took place. All the faces blurred together. At that stage in my recovery, too much cognitive energy would have been required for me to focus and distinguish them. I gazed out blankly. When the service was over, I felt utterly drained. My 45-minute naps were still non-negotiable. I struggled with this, being the only person I knew that still had to do this so long after sustaining a brain injury. I always kept earplugs in my purse in case I needed to disappear and take a nap. I was sensitive to any sort of stimulation when I was trying to sleep, even the ticking of a clock. I came to enjoy leading the weekly devotional services on the assisted living floor. That was my main assignment, which only a few people attended. I used a table to mark off a place in the lobby, covered it with a cloth, and lit a candle on it, creating an intimate space for prayer, sharing stories, and reading scripture. I remember the moment when it occurred to me that I was regaining cognitive and physical function just as a residents at Westlake Woods were losing theirs. Though I had separated the disease of Alzheimer's from my brain injury, we had met on common ground, ultimately going different directions, but walking alongside one another for a time. When I was unable to verbalize deeply held thoughts and feelings, which was often, I reminded myself that each person there also had unexpressed feelings, and this knowledge freed me to connect with them on a level deeper than words. I learned that the best way to lead a devotional service for people with Alzheimer's was to repeat the same song over and over and over again. They loved This Little Light of Mine and Amazing Grace. If you're happy and you know it, got them, some of them up on their feet, clapping and stomping. Others nodded and waved as they sat in their wheelchairs. I often forgot that I even had a brain injury as I sang the songs again and again, clapping and swaying to the music along with them. Over time, individuals emerged out of the sea of faces. One of my favorites was an African-American man I knew only as deacon, which was the role he had played in his church for many years and the name he wanted his friends to use. We shared a love of singing. Deacon never missed a service, and I came to rely on his resonant bass voice in the front row. He often added harmony and a few amens. Deacon's eyes literally lit up when he sang. Together, he and I always led our favorite song, Oh, When the Saints, I would sing out to the group. Oh, when the saints, boomed Deacon's deep voice in response, inviting the others to join in. Go marching in, I continued. Go marching in, echoed Deacon, his face glowing in the light of God's Spirit. We always ended together. Oh Lord, I want to be in the number when the saints go marching in. Now Joyce will offer a few more reflections and read the third and last excerpt.
Thank you, Tamara. So I want to say a few words about humor and hope. Tamara, Michael, and I attended the Institute on Theology and Disability near Los Angeles in June 2017. As a result of travel exhaustion and overstimulation, Tamara experienced a troubling break with reality, which is not unusual, she told me, with brain injury survivors in such a stressful situation. If you've read Forgetting the Former Things, you know that she courageously wrote about this in detail. So all of what I'm sharing is in the book. My job for 3 hours, while Michael made arrangements and we waited for the mobile crisis unit to come and make an assessment of Tamara, was to follow her around the university campus where we were staying and keep her safe and out of traffic. Tamara got angry and a little insulting, and she yelled, "Stop following me," more than once. It was scary to me to watch her undergo such a dramatic personality change from her usual kind and calm and generous self. But it was all totally out of her control and awareness. She got creative. 3 times she looked at her watch and said to me, "Oh, look what time it is. Don't you have an appointment?" Then she said, "Okay, bye," and waved at me as she picked up the pace. But I stuck to her like glue, especially when she tried to commandeer a campus golf cart and take off in it. After the crisis unit appeared, it took several more hours for Tamara's transportation to the behavioral health hospital to arrive. Her agitation and anger erupted at the police and EMTs when they finally showed up to take her. Michael and I, both heartbroken and exhausted, worried that this would be a huge setback, that Tamara wouldn't be able to lead the workshop that we had traveled across the country to offer, and that she would abandon trying to complete the book. I said to him, "This is the worst thing that could have happened." When Tamara was released 3 days later, she wanted to know everything that had happened, and much of it came back to her as I related it to her. I wanted to know how her time in the hospital had been, and she talked about the chaos and the constantly blaring TV, and the fact that she had to eat macaroni and cheese for every lunch and dinner because that was the only option for a vegetarian. Back at the campus that evening, we went to the cafeteria for dinner. There, between the pans of chicken parmesan and beef stroganoff, was the only vegetarian choice: macaroni and cheese. Tamara burst out laughing. And that's when I knew that everything was going to be okay. At lunch the next day, after Tamara had so beautifully and vulnerably and courageously told her story at the workshop we led, she ate a bagel with cream cheese that kept getting stuck in her teeth. She pulled out the toothbrush that she always kept in her purse, looked at me and said apologetically, "I'm going to do something really rude." And I said to her, "Tamara, I can assure you that it won't be the rudest thing that you have done since we got here." We didn't stop laughing for a long time. Humor has the capacity to get us through a lot of difficult stuff. And I'm grateful that Tamara can so easily hold things lightly, even as she takes them absolutely seriously. That gave me a great deal of hope in LA. What I thought was the worst that could happen turned out to be a gift, calling Tamara to a deeper embrace of vulnerability. And that is the great gift that she has passed along to all of us. Here is the final excerpt that we're going to read tonight from Forgetting the Former Things. And these are Tamara's words. In Living Gently in a Violent World, Stanley Hauerwas compared people with cognitive disabilities to the canaries that miners used to carry into coal mines. The canaries, more vulnerable than the miners, collapsed whenever methane gas, which has no detectable odor, built up to a dangerous level in a mine. The miners knew to get out immediately whenever a canary keeled over. Sometimes I feel like that canary. I've paid the price for trying to live up to the societal standard that expects us to work fast and furiously, so that the competition doesn't overtake us. Being a type A personality, I tried for the first few years after my accident to match the pace I had kept before it. I said yes to anything asked of me, sending me into what felt like an endless spiral. I would push too hard, get cognitively overloaded, and then keel over and have to stay in bed for days to recuperate. As soon as I felt better, I was off and running until my body broke down again. Many of us have given in to the cultural idea that we need to strive to be the best and accomplish the most. Being busy all the time is the normal, expected way of life in 21st century North America. But Jennifer Johnson, one of my cognitive therapists, helped me to realize that my plate is smaller than other people's, and I need to limit what I put on it. I've lost count of the number of times that I said no to doing something because I needed to pace myself or rest. And the person who had asked me replied, "At least you have an excuse." My excuse is taking care of myself, which is something all of us must do. But in our society, this is considered weak, something we try to avoid at all costs. Those of us with disabilities offer the world the gift of our vulnerability. As Michael once put it, the vulnerable have a way of mirroring that which remains hidden in the privileged. So many people feel like they can't keep up. Even those with advanced technical degrees and decades of solid work experience feel threatened that their livelihood can be pulled out from under them any minute by automation or corporate restructuring or job outsourcing. In a culture of fast food and instant communication, in which the most common complaints and a myriad of illnesses are related to busyness and stress, those of us who, quote, can't keep up can be teachers about slowing down and savoring life, about regular rest and Sabbath times. People with brain injuries can teach the world that it's important to take care of ourselves first. I don't mean taking this to the extreme and thinking only of oneself, but taking care of ourselves in the midst of multiple commitments to family and friends, work, volunteering, church, whatever demands our time and energy.
Writing this book put me in touch with my own vulnerability. At the workshop that Joyce and I led at the Theology and Disability Institute, a participant suggested that I become validated as a minister of vulnerability by the Presbyterian Church. The Presbyterian Church is structured so that Presbyterian churches in a geographical area come together and are called a presbytery. This presbytery is called the Presbytery of Western North Carolina. Most ministers in the presbytery are pastors of churches, but there are some who have other calls. These positions are called validated ministries. After filling out the paperwork and meeting with the Committee of Validated Ministries, I was validated as a minister of vulnerability. It is an unpaid position housed at Grace Covenant Presbyterian Church. I'm still living into the role a little bit, but essentially I'm an incarnational presence. Due to my traumatic brain injury, I am more vulnerable than others. However, in reality, we are all vulnerable. It is just more prominent in me and in other people who have disabilities. All of us don't want to show our weaknesses because we don't want to lose friends, jobs, or loved ones. So we often present a stiff upper lip instead of our vulnerabilities. This leads to heart problems, high blood pressure, and numerous other health and personal challenges. Hopefully, sharing my vulnerability will allow others to share theirs. When I began to write this book, I hadn't really thought too much about my own vulnerability. I see now it's the main reason I wrote it. I want all of us to not be afraid to be vulnerable. Thank you. And thank you, Joyce. Don't go away though.
Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you, Tamara. Michael, and can you see that I'm hugging Tamara? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is a remote mic, and what we'd like to do would be go into 10 to 12, possibly 15 minutes, of questions and answers to either Tamara or Joyce. We've got a big technological experiment going here, which is, can we really make a hybrid meeting feel like, for both the Zoomers and the in-person people, that two audiences are one? So I'm gonna go to audience view for the Zoom people, and I think that the audience has one of these remote mics. Yeah, Michael, you and Ann can share that, and then I'm going to give this one to Denise, and then you can these three folks can share. So let me for the Zoom audience, let me go. Let me toggle between the in-person audience and the podium as questions and answers as questions are directed to Joyce. But then if questions are directed to Tamara, but as questions are directed to Joyce, I'll put her on spotlight, and we'll see how this works. So let me go to audience view for the so that's Zoom view, going to audience view. And anyone who has questions on either Zoom or in the audience. If you have questions on Zoom, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question. And if you have a question in the audience, just take the remote mic and start talking. Who on Zoom? Oh, Donald. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I'm Donald. Not so much a question, but a very heartfelt, sincere thank you to both of you. I think you wrote about my life. I have a brain disease that has no cure. It's called a cerebral amyloid angiopathy, and it leads either to early death or Alzheimer's. You don't really have a choice. It can't be slowed down. It can't be stopped. I too am writing a book at the request of my students. I just retired 3 years ago after teaching for 45 years at a New England college prep boarding school. And they all wanted me to write a book to describe how I became who I was. I've been through exactly the same thing that you have, Tamara. It's been very difficult. And I just want to say thank you for inspiring me. You continued on. I'm going to continue on. And I just wanted to say thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for that comment.
Well, I'm Denise, and I just wanted to thank you so much to both of you for writing this book and for your perseverance and for figuring out ways to live your life and having the vulnerability to really write this book. And I don't have any questions, but I just want to thank you. It meant a lot to me, and I just feel like I understand a little bit better about people with disabilities.
I
And I
appreciate
love,
that.
yeah, and I loved your story, like I said earlier, the story about the man in the swimming pool. And how sweet you were once you realized where he was coming from.
Yeah.
You know, just so caring. So thank you.
Anyone else? Michael, yeah.
I'll go ahead. So I have a question for Joyce. You wrote this book, or you assisted here, and how did you balance sort of drawing out Tamara's vulnerability and maybe challenging her on the one hand, and then on the other hand, being a friend and you went to church together, so you kind of don't want to offend her or get too intrusive, but then on the other hand, you want to have a good book that has vulnerable material in it. Does that make sense? Kind of.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I have realized in working with people who live great lives but are not generally writers or haven't written books before is that it's probably more helpful that I'm a pastor than that I'm a writer in working with people. I mean, I feel fine about giving the editorial work and the critique and helping with organization and all of that, but I also realize that part of it is just accompanying people to offer support and help build confidence. And as Tamara knows, it was more challenging working with her because I really don't like telling people what to do. And I think she had to tell me several times, just tell me what to do. And I had to get to the point of realizing that this actually is what would be most helpful to her, even though it felt like it went against my personality, And so I think it was, for me, probably the hardest thing, Michael, and some about this is, and Tamara shared this, that there were times where she just felt like she just couldn't do it and that we shouldn't continue with the book. And it was very, very hard for me to know whether to acknowledge that that was in fact a limitation and that she couldn't do it, or whether it was time for me to give another pep talk about, you've come this far, Tamara, you can do it. Because I really didn't know enough. I mean, I was learning about brain injury in the process. And so I really didn't always know whether it was time to push a little harder or, time to accept that we weren't going to get the book done, which, would have been okay. But I think a great sadness for both of us and disappointment if we hadn't stuck with it. So, I tried to listen to you, Tamara, as to what you needed and how to respond to that. And it was challenging, but I'm really grateful for it because it gave me a sense of what the challenges really are for someone trying to write a book. And Donald, I wish you well. I'm really glad to hear that you're gonna write a book, and I hope that you stick with it. Does that answer your question, Michael?
Yes.
Hi, Tamara. This is Tom Byers, and I want to start by thanking you. I feel that this has been a very helpful thing for me and given me a deepened appreciation of just how valuable it's been to have you share so openly, the challenges you've dealt with. I guess a question that I would ask is, can you tell us anything about when you're interacting with someone? Obviously, you have to interact with a range of people, some of whom, have an awareness of your challenges and some who don't. So when you're doing that, how do you make the determinations about when and how much to share with others about the challenges that you are dealing with?
Well, that's a really good question. And it's one I struggle with. Because, I mean, my tendency sometimes is just to let it all hang out, which is not helpful. So I try to judge the person, and I try to look at what the conversation is. I mean, if it's just a passing conversation, like, oh, I have trouble with directions, you know, I'll just let it go. But if it's someone that I really know, or someone I sort of know, then I might say a little bit more about it. And, you know, like the cognitive, cognitive overload is big, and so is the overstimulation stuff. That one is really huge. And that one, I pretty much tell anybody that, just because I can't, if I'm in a room with someone and they're talking and I can't hear them, then it just doesn't make any sense. So that's an issue that I almost always will talk about. But some of the others, I just judge based on the relationship, based on how much time we have. I mean, if we're just have a couple of minutes, I'm not going to get into very much. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yes, I think it does. And while I've got the floor, Tamara, I want to thank you here in front of this group for something you performed in the past that I think was so uniquely valuable. Some years back, there was a young man affiliated with our congregation who was dying over a very long period of time of a brain tumor, a very slow kind of brain tumor. And I was troubled because I knew that somehow we needed to reach out to him, and I felt terribly daunted to think about trying to do something like that myself. And somehow or the other, I got pointed to you, and you very willingly said that you would do that task. And you, I think you went about it very meaningfully. And that was just a wonderful representation of the wider community to him, a role that I think few felt they could take on. And yet I think he had sort of a unique gift in that situation. And I don't know if I've adequately thanked you for that, but I want to thank you right now.
Well, thank you for that. I remember. I appreciate that.
Any last words, Joyce? Joyce?
Just thank you for the opportunity to do this. It's been a few years since we wrote the book together, and it was really good for me, Tamara, to think about it again and remember the experience, and to be grateful for it and to be able to share it. So thank you all.
Tamara, last word?
I was really nervous tonight. I'll just say that. I don't know why. There's just so many papers in here, and I kept thinking, oh gosh, what if I lose my track? I don't usually get that nervous, but I was nervous. And once I got here, I was fine, which typically happens when I get nervous. If once I get going, I'm usually okay. But I was nervous.
Why don't we give a hand, both via Zoom, unmute yourself and give a hand, and in person.
Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you.
So let me just end the series by saying, as we move into the holiday season, it's been a great evening. For the in-person folks, we're actually going to distribute some cards about the Wilma Diamond Legacy website. It's brand new, redesigned website. It's basically an online magazine featuring regularly updated articles in the categories that Wilma Diamond was interested in: environmental integrity, social justice, and the power of the written and spoken word. These are going to be regularly updated featured articles. There are half a dozen of these articles in each category already. So you could go on that website, spend a couple of hours reading what's already up there. So we've got cards to hand out. I'm going to ask the in-person folks, we put out our donation basket, and if you give $10 or more, you get a free pen. If you're zooming in, you can't take advantage of that incredible offer. But I would ask you to visit WilmaDiamondLegacy.org and take advantage of the free online magazine articles. So everybody, we're going to sign off as soon as I can get over to the Technology Center. I will end the meeting for Zoom. And just thank you for being here and have a great holiday season.
Thank you. Thank you for. Watching me very correctly. Oh, yeah. I love.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.